Aziz Salman is going to speak about the revival of Bandung spirit for the 21st century and trans-international nationalism. Aziz, you have 20 minutes. If you need a minute or two more, we'll try to create the time for you. But you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Greeting, congrats. I'm Aziz Salman, I'm a political scientist lecturing in international relations in Montreal. I'm the coordinator of the international campaign Justice for Sankara and a member of GRILA, the Group for Research and Initiative for the Liberation of Africa, and also the chair of the board at the Internationalist Center. Well, it's an honor to be here, and thank you all for your warm hospitality. I'm delighted to present some key issues also raised in the closing remarks of our book, just launched yesterday in Jakarta. Apparently it's going to be available later in the afternoon. So my topic, as Dr. Ebrima Sall just mentioned, is the revival of the Bandung spirit for the 21st century and aligned trans-internationalism. As my young fellow Levita Somali just kindly shared with me, today is the Youth House Day in Indonesia, or Sumpah Pemuda. So I'm dedicating this speech to the Indonesian youth and to also Mehdi Ben Barka, the Secretary of the Tricontinental. All men are intellectuals, but not all men have in society the function of intellectuals, said Gramsci. What are we doing here? We, the so-called intellectual of the Global South, symbolically gathered in Bandung. What interests me is the relevance of the Bandung spirit for the 21st century, and the formation and crystallization of the intellectuals, organic to the interests of the masses, the working class, the victims of imperialism. Intellectuals who may find a role in the revolutionary movement, not necessarily are far-sighted leaders, but alongside those who struggle for democratic power. The spirit of almost forgotten people like Ali Sastroami Jojo to advocate cooperation of Afro-Asian countries is still needed for world peace and South-South resistance against Nekolim, the Indonesian word for neocolonialism and colonialism, and also in favor of democratization of society, social progress, and anti-imperialist position. Let me be clear. The Bandung legacy is no longer neutrality. Its spirit needs now to build an anti-comprador social bloc rooted in a tri-continental strategy within the Global South. I call that internationalist constellation trans-internationalism, since change in the 21st century arises from the South. The 6 years of the non-alignment movement are an opportunity to start a fresh page, instead of enduring the unipolar era of this fatal spiral. Most of the non-aligned movement spirit, the Bandung 10-item platform, are still pertinent, they are still relevant. For example, resisting the military control of the planet, advocating national and international policies for a more equitable management of resources for all peoples, safeguarding the right of nations to choose their own development while ensuring peace and solidarity among them. The demand and the measures that arose from the non-aligned movement of Bandung constituted, in the Cold War era, a middle pathway of nationalism defending independent democracy. Amazing historical events happened. The 1954 Jamben Fu victory that led to the Bandung Conference the Suez Nationalization of 1956, the Republic Proclamation in Ghana and Guinea in 1957, and in Baghdad in 1959, the Algerian liberation struggle all over the Third World, independence processes, the Congo crisis, the Vietnamese War, South Africa and Rhodesia anti-apartheid struggle, Palestine occupation, Allende's Chile crisis, the Israel-Arab and Palestinian question, etc., etc. Not to mention the new international economic order that failed. Between 1960 and 70, India represented itself alone, more than symbolically, the difficult balance of power between the people around. It has benefited a great deal of help from the Soviet Union for its industry, while harvesting 10 billion of free aid from the United States. Everywhere in the once called Third World, nation development strategy were advancement of national bourgeois or petit bourgeois interest, and their essential inputs are, however, still important, so considerably today without breadth. The scattering of states of the South and their capitalist competition have unfortunately exhausted the potential of the group of the G17, and it is indeed the end of the Bandung era. The era of the East-West bipolarization of the world has ended, and that of North-South persists like imperialism, but in a more sophisticated way. Having survived the Cold War, the non-aligned movement changed positively international relations, international human rights, and development issues. Yet, it suffers more than ever the geopolitical and economic unipolarity of the global market order. National sovereign spaces have been considerably destabilized by arbitrary, unjust practices of big financial institutions, whether public or private. The oligopolistic globalized capitalism and the supra-imperialist order controlling all production and consumption are irreversibly threatening life on Earth. This is why things have to evolve, and neutrality is no longer possible as the core philosophy of the Bandung spirit. It is time for the new generation to take a stand and with audacity distance itself from the so-called pragmatic and moderate position which have helped the decay of the G77. It is time, before it's too late, to revive the core spirit of the Tricontinental and the late organization de Solidaridad de los Pueblos de Africa, Asia and America, or SPAL, despite the assassination of the three main secretaries, Menji Ben Baka, Che Guevara, and Amilcar Cabral. Today, the Bandung spirit should connect more with the recent radical anti-imperialist experiences of Latin and Central America. We need a new vision to align on the southern front of the people and update internationalism. We need a new vision to align on the southern front of the people, to be resolutely anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist, crystallizing in the wake of internationalism in the 21st century, and articulating a strategy on defending the commons and regaining sovereignty of nations toward maybe the People's Fifth International. So trans-internationalism offers a bolder formula to adapt internationalism to the economic and geopolitical order imposed by the globalized capitalist expansion. By adapting to new internationalist transnational dimensions, we advocate for a global reorganization in a universalistic, ethical, and socio-ecological transition. The renationalization and socialization of oligopolies could be the basis of a new negotiated solidarity effort in the Tricontinental front. The resistance, really growing mainly from the global south and gradually irradiating areas of the north, rediscovers in the ecological emergency issues like egalitarianism of opportunity, social justice, individual commitment of each human. This personal commitment must be multiplied by the collective strength of the human community. The logic of the market order, destructive of social relations and the environment, is embedded in development. We need to understand that development is using this like a Trojan horse. Development has gone astray in an economicist acceleration. Globalization, however, a historical reality of many centuries old, has become an euphemism to describe the acceleration of capitalist accumulation and the redeployment of imperialism. This is done under the leadership of oligopolies, plutocracies, and remaining strong pockets of states' power that are still geopolitically dominant. The puncture that this conjunction of oligopolies, plutocrat, and dominant states still exerts on labor exploitation and surplus value accentuate global polarization. The economic asymmetry is aggravated by a confusion between modernization and westernization that accentuate tendencies toward homogenization and standardization without being able to achieve them, despite of the capture of hypnotized, totally hypnotized masses. Subjected to structural adjustment policies and harsh conditionalities in the past 3 decades, the countries on the periphery seem paralyzed and ranks scattered under the brutal dispossession they undergo. The nation-state has been sorely lacking in the development of public politics. The negative social, political, and ecological consequences of these measures will take decades to stamp out of our countries. People and society are, however, not passive, but the depoliticization of the neoliberal era has undermined political organization. Resistance persists everywhere, however, especially with the emergence of the BRICS, which is still less than 15% of world GDP. These countries managed to somehow better control their own accumulation. That threatened the hegemony of the dominant blocs of the imperialist troika, United States, Japan, and Europe. And having lost in the economic field, the troika is reduced to co-opt the so-called emerging country, as they're trying to do in the G20, to reinvigorate their own decline growth rate and to maintain in stagnation all the other countries. This is done by strategic and geopolitical interference to reaffirm its supremacy in the South, dispossession of natural resources by exploiting conflicts and instrumentalizing various terrorist expressions that also have in many places their own genuine agenda. The strategy entails summoning all countries to align under a safe crusade or face disruption of international cooperation and direct foreign investment. So comprador bourgeoisie, subaltern allies of the globalized bourgeoisie are beneficiating from this globalized consensus. Growth without proper redistribution to the masses being part of the problem. North-South cooperation, solidarity remains a chimera maintained by the global elites. The so-called development, ODA, international cooperation, has never reached the 0.7% that was called in 1969. And the famous Millennium Development Goals and poverty reduction strategies that just failed were mainly diversion of the neoliberal agenda. Even the brand new UN Sustainable Development Goals to be reached in 2030, which need roughly a yearly 4,000 billion investment during 15 years, need so many complicated political will, conditions from the private sector, and fiscal imposition that we can easily question its outcome. So most of all these international cooperation tricks are objective regulation strength for the active dependent inclusion of the southern country in the world economy. However, there is resistance since the failing of the new international economic order. For example, in objecting to capital flight, in trying to regulate investment, in defending the agrarian question against land grabbing with land-regulated investment, in defending the agrarian question with the land reform, ensuring food sufficiency and protection of production of the peasantry, in developing antibodies against the neoliberal virus, in advocating peace against the militaristic crusades, the spirit of Bandung still persists in many strata of our societies. Comrades, it's important to build on the historical struggle that have been fought and to more boldly work on others in order to translate the genuine credential of our people. The substantial gain of the left in Latin America, the breaks that have been placed on the uprising in North Africa or recently in the small Burkina Faso should be opposed to the disarray of the left and the great need for a democratic repoliticization of the masses. A major portion of the masses, the so-called lumpen proletariat or reserve army, is rendered superfluous for global capitalism that tried to contain their desperate migrations. As Guevara said once in a speech at the Afro-Asian Economic Forum in Algiers, in this way, an immense underlying force in our continents, miserably exploited but never aided in their development, could be put in motion, and a new stage of an attempted division of labor could begin, based not on the history of what has been done up to now, but what can be done in the future. United against the oppression of nations, the potential to regain the path of self-reliance and strengthen the three-continental front are the only exit possible against the global South crisis. I see that people who actually are on the forefront know that this radical reform of the Bandung front is eminently political and passes through the rediscovery of internationalism and the defense, the tide through the rebuilding of a front against collective imperialism. Since the regulatory mechanism, whether multilateral or transnational, that exist globally to protect the commons, are becoming archaic or inoperable, the three-continental front within the non-aligned movement should address the issue on the commons, the last non-commodified public spaces, and promote the adoption of a universal declaration for the common good of humanity. The strategy must reflect viewpoints from progressive forces in the South, but also in the North, who are willing to offer their support. To do this, Mr. President, we must now pass this phase of indignation, engage more deeply, and show even more audacity and organization toward the development of a three-continental international political platform until we reach the trans-internationalist place. That will be a second decisive step for the Bandung spirit towards affirming democratic and popular sovereignty. Here, it will be important to firmly complete the gain of the preceding era and affirm an alignment with nation-state, popular movement, social groups, associations, individuals on the basis of internationalism in the specific condition that marks this transnational era. Beyond Bandung will provide a roadmap for a societal project in a polycentric world where popular forces of the South, fed up with the North-South monologue, are proposing to reorient globalization towards a development that is truly about balance, social justice, protecting Mother Earth, well-being, proper conduct, and attitude. So I call, let us build a concerted leadership that support the content of a universal declaration for the common good of humanity. Let us develop a three-continental trans-internationalist political platform of convergence with a special focus on the youth and the women. Let us resist against war and the presence of foreign militaries based in our countries. Youth of Indonesia, please join me. Give me a dozen students. We transform the world, have said Sukarno, probably you remember. Today is a special day. It's a day for these youth, and they are joining us here in this place. They were not witnessing the Bandung conference, but they are very important. They are the future. You are the present, you are the future. So, comrades, I would ask you to please stand up in homage of the Indonesian Youth Day in this Bandung Historic Group. So, please repeat after us. We have prepared something. When the people stand up, imperialism falls. Diversity in unity, Bhinneka Tunggal Ika. Terima kasih.
Thank you very much, Aziz. That was very good, and I think it's good. It was a great idea to bring the young people to the meeting, and this was really absolutely wonderful. And really thank you for it. You've said a lot. Been to raise a number of very, very important points. Maybe mention 2 or 3 of them. I think the point about the Bandung spirit having to be also anti-comprador, informed by a new kind of internationalism, connecting with struggles across the world, in Latin America, that's where being anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist, having to challenge globalization in its current form. I think all those are very, very important points. The point about the market, I think you came to that, you raised it several times in your presentation. The logic of the market, the way the commons have been, privatized sort of, through the logic of the market. I think that's a very fundamental point. And the fact of the matter is, even some of the so-called solutions is now, in the face of climate change, very common to hear people talk about the green economy. But that whole thing is marketized completely. The green economy is conceptualized in a way, very often in pure market terms. I say, here's a new way of doing business, and you don't get out of the logic of really privatizing the commons. I think the point about confusing modernization with westernization is also very, very important. And the big players, of course, that are still, wielding a lot of power are the institutions, wanted organizations that are at the service of some of the cause of the world today. And a lot of issues having to do with women, youth, the agrarian question. I think these are all very important issues that we have to take into account as we reflect on the new kind of tricontinental international space that ought to be constructed. A space that definitely will be the opposite of the world that we are looking at today. So thank you very much again for these important contributions. And I would like to invite the second speaker, who is Professor Resh Bahadur Basnet. He's from Nepal. He holds a PhD in chemistry, obtained at the University of Delhi in 1986. And he's been teaching for about 40 years in tribe-born university in Nepal. He is an activist as well, a defender of human rights and peace, and has been involved in that struggle for several decades already. The professor will say a little bit more about the kind of work he is doing and how the work is relevant to the theme of this particular session, but also to the whole of this conference on Bandung. Professor, you have the floor for 20 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. You have limited my time with 10 minutes. I don't think I'll be able to do that. Okay, thank you.
Well, you can make it in 15 minutes.
I'm sorry. As you have already introduced me, I'm from the land of Buddha, who was born 2,500 years ago and enlightened millions of people across the world, and also from the land of Mount Everest. So, you have already introduced myself. I do not want to say anything about myself. Others should say if something is with me. I believe in that only. Now, regarding my paper, the topic is strengthening Bandung spirit in the global context. So, in my paper, I have included mainly 4 points. Terrorism, how it is affecting the peace process, and separatist movement, how it is affecting the peace and stability, and the global warming or the climate change, how it is affecting the total development process and peace process in the world. And the 4th point I would like to mention here in the paper, weapons of mass destruction, which is affecting peace process and development process as well. Now I would like to go to the point itself. Mr. Chairman, delegates, participants, ladies and gentlemen, I feel greatly honored and privileged to express my gratitude to the organizer for giving me the opportunity to participate on behalf of APSO Nepal, Afro-Asian People's Solidarity Organization Nepal, in this World Conference. In this beautiful city, Bandung, of this great nation, Indonesia. At the outset, I would like to mention briefly about the activities carried out by my own organization, which I represent here. That is Afro-Asian People's Solidarity Organization, Nepal. AFSO Nepal has indeed in past raising voices in national and international forums since its establishment in 1958 in favor of peace, sovereignty, security, development, human rights, democracy, disarmament, justice, national independence, and is making people aware against colonialism, imperialism, racial and social discrimination, like caste and creed, apartheid, and so on and so forth. Also, it has been making the people aware through both electronic and press media and through conferences, seminars, lectures against aforementioned points and above all, war and military build-ups by strong nations. Regarding the theme of this conference, we have seen in the last 60 years several organizations of the world have been raising voices for building sovereignty for the nations and keep them free from hegemony. In reality, this was one of the aims and spirits of the conference, Bandung Conference of 1955. The declarations of the Bandung Summit proved this fact, and those were promotion of world peace and cooperation, including the 5 principles, Panchashil, put forward by the then Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru. Mutual respect for each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty, mutual non-aggression, mutual non-interference in domestic affairs, equality and mutual benefits, peaceful coexistence, promotion of Afro-Asian economic and cultural cooperation, and to oppose colonialism or neo-colonialism by any nation or and liberation from the hegemony of the superpowers. Now, 6 decades after the summit, if we look back into the progress that has been made in achieving its goal, it shall be definitely be difficult to find encouraging outcomes. On the contrary, situations are deteriorating and aggravating in many dimensions, and problems have arisen. On one hand, we have been campaigning for world peace and cooperation, justice and human rights, stability and prosperity. Whereas on the other hand, wars are continuing in different parts of the nations. There is growing trend of terrorism, separatism, aggression, change in environment, and production of weapons of mass destruction. Terrorism has been engulfing the nations of the world, particularly in Asia and Africa. Most common and innocent people have become the targets of the terrorists. For example, Islamic states of Syria and Iraq, Hamas of Palestine, Hezbollah of Lebanon, PKK of Turkey, and Taliban of Pakistan and Afghanistan, Boko Haram of Nigeria. Al-Qaeda of Arab and Middle East, so on and so forth. Terrorism in the name of caste and ethnicity and religion, such as Shia and Sunni, Hutu and Tutsi, Christianity and non-Christianity, Protestant and Catholic, Hindu and Muslims, have become greater challenges to achieve peace and security in our nations. Our belief on peace settlement of all kinds of disputes has been lagging behind. It is giving me a little bit of trouble. Okay. Similarly, separatist movements in the name of geographical settlements, color, race, caste, ethnicity has become another option for killing people in the present world. It has become a common phenomenon, somehow or other, to incite the people in the internal matters of sovereign states by the stronger ones. The world has seen such instances in the past in the countries like Ukraine, Crimea, Libya, Egypt, Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan. Recently in Nepal, and in so many other countries of the world, aggression and domination in the internal affairs by the so-called developed and stronger nations still remain to continue. Presently, what India has been doing in Nepal after the promulgation of the new constitution, written by its own people on the 20th of September 2015, simply 5 weeks ago, is an act of outright hegemony and unethical domination to the smaller neighboring country, a direct interference in the internal affairs of the sovereign nation. It has been expressing positive views towards the demand of the agitating regional political parties of southern Nepal, nearby its borders areas, who do not want to accept the constitution prepared and passed by about 91% of the Constituent Assembly members. Now, India has been pressurizing the government to fulfill their demand. In view of this fact, India has unofficially blocked the borders, thereby stopping the inflow of the petroleum products and other necessary goods into Nepal, violating the international right of transit for landlocked countries. Now, question arises, where are 5 principles of coexistence propounded by Nehru, and where does the Bandung spirit exist? This is a serious question for us right now. Environment change due to global warming is posing a great threat to the whole world. Sea level rise has been immersing the low-level countries and islands, thereby displacing millions of the human beings, animals, destroying the vegetation and affecting the biodiversity, which causes the extinction of animals, plant species and microorganisms. Similarly, climate change is causing excessive rainfall in some parts of the world, thus becoming the main cause of the floods, landslides and desertification. On the other hand, scarce rainfall in some parts of the world is bringing adverse effect in total ecosystem. Weapons of mass destruction, such as biological, chemical, nuclear, radiological or other weapons, pose great threat to peace and security. Of all the weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons have become the most powerful weapons of mass destruction in today's world. Perhaps this is the reason why nuclear non-proliferation treaty was proposed by UN in 1995, which was signed by over 189 countries, and Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty (CTBT) was signed by over 178 countries. But the powerful signatory nations still possess such weapons which may destroy the world peace at any moment. Therefore, a mass movement is required for making a nuclear weapons-free world so that our upcoming generation can live with peace and security in future. Moreover, increase in hunger, poverty, disease, wars, refugee problems, injustices in several nations are destabilizing the world. In such circumstances, organizations from all over the world must unite to strengthen the Bandung vision of 1955 and its following conferences. For a better world to live in the context of globalization and for strengthening the Bandung vision, I'd like to draw urgent attention of the delegates of this conference and the people at large to firstly reaffirm the Panchaship as the 5 principles of the peaceful coexistence, which reflects the vision of Bandung spirit, the foundation of EPSO and NAM. Secondly, address the contemporary and vital issues in different areas mentioned in the text above. Finally, once again, I, on behalf of EXO Nepal, Afro-Asian People's Solidarity Organization Nepal, call upon all the people around the world and the emerging forces, I call it emerging powers, for a better world, to live in with harmony based upon freedom, justice, love, compassion, and equality. Thank you. Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen, for listening with immense passion. Thank you once more.
Thank you very much, Professor Basnet. That was a passionate plea for peace and a very good intervention as well. Certainly the point about terrorism and violence that we witness in different parts of the world, you mentioned a number of people that are wreaking havoc everywhere, is something that preoccupies, I think, we need to have our own take on these issues. You spent time thinking about what India is doing in the sub-region. I think in the previous panel, the same issue came up. It's about having justice and relations of equality at every level, including at sub-regional level, not having a big talk that is relevant to the rest of the world, but also examining what is happening and paying particular attention to the African nations. Nuclear-free war, obviously, that's a very important point, and I think the 5 principles to peaceful coexistence is also good to remind all of us. Thank you very much again. I'd like to invite now Dr. Beatrix Issue, who initially was supposed to read a paper written by Monica Brockman titled The Spirit of Bandung in the 21st Century Towards a Strategic Agenda for Latin America. First of all, Dr. Beatrix Issue is head of the Department of Political Science at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. She's the coordinator of the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies of Africa, Asia, and South-South Relations at the same university. I presume what she'll be sharing with us are her own thoughts on the subject, on this whole topic of the spirit of Bandung in the 21st century and a strategic agenda for that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I am obliged to explain to you that really I'm here because unfortunately my colleague and my dear friend Monica Brockman at this moment is facing some health problems, and due to that he was not able to be today with us as he would like to be. I was late because I was trying to talk to her because I haven't received the paper, and so she explained to me that it was impossible for her to conclude it, and therefore she apologized. So in this situation, I only can arrange some ideas, not to avoid the Latin America issue. Of course, I'm very aware of the importance of including Latin America. I share this preoccupation with Aziz, with Professor Mohanty. We need, as Latin Americans, we need to be reunited with you African and Asian people in this decisive moment of our history. So I try very briefly to present to you in historical perspective the present moment we are facing in our continent. Briefly saying, I was trying to put my ideas in order in such a brief time. I would first say that there is a Mexican popular expression that is like that. Poor Mexico so far from God, so close to the United States. The destiny of our continent, Latin American continent, is really very closely related to the United States external policy. As you may know, we are still now seeing, but by the United States, or at least by those who have the power, not the people of the United States, but the core of the power of the United States as its own backyard. Latin America is the backyard of the United States. And therefore, of course, we have, in their view, no right to decide what is the main core of the Bandung proposal to liberate ourselves and to choose our way of liberating. I was trying to keep in mind some moments of our recent history that could be the background of an explanation of the present situation. After the end of World War II, and in part inspired by the Cuban Revolution, many very progressive governments took power through elections in Latin America. That was the case in Brazil, and I'm talking on the 50s and the 60s, yeah, of the 20th century. That was the case in Brazil, that was the case in Uruguay, that was the case in Argentina, and many other countries. As a consequence of their measures, for instance, in Brazil, yesterday we heard this presentation of our Chinese colleague about the extremely concentrated land power in a few hands in Brazil nowadays. Well, that is a consequence of the coup d'etat, because one of the main aspirations of that government that was thrown out, President João Goulart, was a very strong land reform and all nationalization of the natural resources. The consequence? Coup d'etat. The documents recently released after 40 years or 50 years, you know that the Pentagon and the Secret Services have to release due to their own law the documents. So it is absolutely documented, the participation of the United States in the coup d'etat in Brazil. The coup d'etat in Brazil in 1964 was the first of a series of coup d'etat in all our South American region. In my own country, Uruguay, I'm Uruguayan born, and I have both citizens of Uruguay and in Brazil, where I lived for more than 30 years. In Brazil, in Uruguay, in Argentina, in Chile, there was, in a period of 8 or 10 years, there were coup d'etat, and with massive repression and assassination of the main leaderships, exile, in the case of Argentina and Chile, disappearance of persons. I'm sure you may have heard that those who were disappeared by the repression, the police or the army itself, and in the case of women who were carrying babies or had the babies in prison, the babies were took by the police or by the army and put into and given to their own torturers or the members of the repression apparatus. Nowadays, those babies are in their 30 years or 25 years. We say their families could recover almost 100 of them to know who them really are. That is a very, very critical legacy of that period, even perhaps in a global sense, not the most important. Well, after the period of dictatorship, that was a very long and very difficult period with many forms of resistance, in the 21st century, many of our countries were able to reconstruct the democracy, and through democracy again, after having had, for instance, the experience of armed struggle but defeated, through elections, new governments, progressive governments were elected. That was and that is the case of Brazil, Uruguay, Ecuador, Argentina, Brazil, Venezuela, with, of course, they are not all the same, but basically they are progressive-oriented governments. But the reaction is extremely strong. The reaction internally of those who are the privileged in society, most of them very well related to financially to external interest in the state mainly, but not only, and also the mass media, which is the way they are trying to mine, to overthrow these legal governments. The moment we are facing is that we have to understand that one of the key questions we are talking of is the sovereignty of our countries, the possibility of having in our hands the way of using our very rich natural resources. For instance, I don't know if you have such an information, but for instance in Brazil, we have in the Amazon region one of the most important biodiversity of the world. In terms of water, which may be the next war, many theologians are saying that the next war will be for water. Yeah? We have not only the resources of the Amazon region, but also what we call the Guarani, Reservatorio Guarani, that is underground water in such a big extension that is under the territory of Uruguay, of Argentina, of Paraguay, and the southern part of Brazil. All of this is water, underground water. So we possibly in South America have the most important reserves of water of the world. And oil. The Brazilian engineers managed to develop a way of extracting oil from under the bottom of the ocean. There is a 2 kilometers extension of salt. Nowadays, the Brazilian engineering developed a way to put their equipment to penetrate into the salt layer and to go down to the real bottom of the ocean and to pick the oil and extract the oil. It is still, nowadays we are extracting in Brazil oil in that way in the bottom of the ocean. The reserves are calculated in an extension that are more important than all the reserves in Saudi Arabia. So, I think this explains a bit what we are talking about when we are talking on pressure that are supporting our progressive governments through all the means you may imagine. So, with this situation, it is very important to unite our efforts, not only to allow those governments to continue in power and to renovate the democratic possibilities of expansion, of freedom, of liberty, of equality, but also to improve and to better use this period to really reinforce and liberate from these external pressures. In this sense, I think that it would be most important for our conference to have an expression, an explicit support for what is happening and for the Latin American people. And of course, I don't think that we only should put this, because many other people in the world are needing of support. I think, of course, we should have an explicit demonstration of solidarity with Palestine, with the situation in Burkina Faso. Perhaps not all the situation, but some of the key questions of our moment I suggest that we could include in our final declaration. Well, as I am just trying to put together some ideas, I didn't know that Monica couldn't afford to conclude his presentation. I hope that would be useful for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very, very much. I think colleagues will agree with me that this was really great. It got a good sense of what it means in the context of Latin America to keep the spirit of Bandung alive, and what kind of issues on the agenda, the struggles that are going on there at various levels. I think a number of things in your presentation which are quite interesting to note. First of all, the whole very fact that Latin America is seen to be the backyard of the United States, and the United States behaving as if Latin America is its own backyard and allowing certain things, not allowing other things. And the struggle to get out of that kind of particular situation, I think is a very important issue, and it's directly really in line with the discussions and the ambitions that are expressed in Bandung. The examples you have cited of struggles and different ways in which a number of progressive governments came to power through liberation struggles in some instances, coup d'etats in other instances, elections more interestingly. Invariably what happens is a contestation of that particular choice of the people by dominant powers, and I think that's interesting. And I think it's a good lesson for us here, also to know that it will take a struggle to keep the Bandung spirit alive. It will take a struggle, because we are challenging established powers and vested interests. And the struggle will take many forms: subversion, ideological battles, intimidation, various kinds of military interventions. And this is, I think, very important to see how it's already unfolding in the context of Latin America. Many issues you raised, to the water, the land question that exists in some places, are very important. While the point about solidarity with Palestine is a very important point, I think. And I think here we really have a number of issues which I think enrich the discussion on Bandung and on keeping the Bandung spirit. Basically, it's about what is the agenda for the global South today, in the current context in which we are today. So I'd like to open the floor for a discussion on the three presentations. Thank you very much. Really, we do have a contribution from Latin America, and I think that was the point, and you've helped us very much. I have a number of other issues which I want to raise at the end, but let me first open the floor for contributions. To anybody who would like, if you make contributions short, we can have several rounds of interventions. I think we basically should have been stopping at 3 o'clock. I think we can, Professor Darwis, take 15, 20 minutes? Yeah. Okay. Good. So the floor is open, whoever wants to take it. Comments, contributions. Yes.
Thank you for another yet very interesting session, which in fact included various angles, which was quite comprehensive. There's one point which I would like, Mr. Chairman, to address to our colleague from Nepal. Am I right in thinking, and please kindly correct me if I'm mistaken or if I got it wrongly, Am I right in thinking that you were partly suggesting to solve internal conflicts within the Bandung spirits between the members of the Bandung community? And if this was the case, then could you kindly lead us to an avenue where we could probably think together how to solve these problems so that we can get along and continue, please? Thank you.
Yes, please.
Yeah, my question is for Aziz. The terminology about the term trans-internationalism. I personally have a problem with adopting that term because for me it sounds very neutral. Maybe I am mistaken. Trans-internationalism. If you take it without, your explanation that it's tricontinental and it does not convey the Bandung spirit or the tricontinental spirit, if it is taken as a term by itself. So I think that as I proposed in the morning, we should discuss the terminology to be adopted in the future, and maybe there will be consensus that this term reflects the aspirations of the tricontinental or Afro-Asian, Latin American, global South position. Thank you.
Any other conclusion? Yes, I got you and then I go to you.
Just my query to the Brazilian speaker. You talked about the oil resources in terms of water resources, right? And in terms of oil also, the underground water from the sea water ocean. However, my query is that Brazilian technology in producing diesel from sugarcane. How is the situation of the sugarcane and this output of sugarcane converted into the diesel? Is it still sustaining and the future? Because by producing this diesel from sugarcane is, in other words, enhancing the farmer's strength, isn't it? Capacity and the income generation and sustainability point of view also, it is a renewable and also an encouraging factor for the farmers. So what is the government's policy in terms of producing diesel from sugarcane? Because I think Brazil is the first country in the world to show, to produce diesel from sugarcane. This is my inquiry.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, while we are talking about the Bandung spirit in the 21st century, I just remember that half a century ago, the important things are the leaders, great men, big institutions, and we still remember that by the end of the 20th century, after this postmodernism thinking, post-colonial thinking, we know that the real thing is in the hands of the common people, not just the leaders anymore. I'm just thinking that maybe I could propose that solidarity should be built from the bottom up, from the people themselves. And from what I see, the common denominators of the so-called developing nations are the newly urbanized are recently urbanized, in contrast with the long-established urbanities in the old world, I mean the Europe and the America. I think this class of people, this newly urbanized, have their own tastes and tendencies. They might have, and I think it's already, we already see it, like in Indonesia some 20 years ago, there are a rush of telenovelas. It's entertainment for the common people in the common media, which imported from South America. And we have been enamored by Kung Fu style films from Hong Kong. Recently, we listened to K-pop music from Korea. Why don't we try this kind of exchange between, I think, I'm concerned more with between Asia and Africa. I do think Africa has very strong tradition and cultural and art which could be packaged into something visual, you know, we are all depends on visuals, and exchange this low-level entertainment between regions or countries. I know personally that Indonesia has produced many so-called telenovelas, and that might be exchanged with other countries and raised awareness, which is the seeds of solidarity. This sounds very simple, but that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would like to thank the panelists for their very important contribution. I had the opportunity to read Aziz's paper, and I agree with many of his proposals. Though the term trans-internationalist might be for the general public, might be difficult to appropriate. Just a short question for Professor Basnet. I think you have linked the party of the Kurds. You have quoted them among the terrorists. So I have a question about that. How can you clarify if you think that the struggle of the Kurds and what Boko Haram is doing is at the same level? I don't think. Also for Latin America, I think we must not forget Caribbean and even the African diaspora in the United States. It's sure they are in the north, in the USA, but they are also suffering a blight in just think about the criminality, the number of black people who are in prison in the USA, the death penalty upon the African diaspora. So we have to see how our platform can also address the plight of the African diaspora in the USA. I think I will stop. It's a good point, Bahadur. Give a chance to the panelists to respond. Aziz, just in the same order as
Thank you. When I have, I'm talking to my Palestinian sister, and as Mr. Ki-Zerbo raised, when you coin the new words, in our field it takes time. I'm not sure this word will prevail in a way, but we have a problem to describe the new reality trying to explain. Internationalism is a term that appeared at the end of the 19th century. It entails understanding what is nationalism first. So we can question what nationhood is. And the spirit of internationalism was to say, these people who would defend the condition of other people, let's say people who went to the Spanish War to fight against fascism, despite of the fact that it came from America, Africa, or Asia, or Arabic countries. They were not Spaniards, but they went to Spain. These people were internationalists. If we care about what is happening in Palestine, and you are a Latino or an Inuit, this is internationalism. But it also has a class and worker component, is to say that the workers of the world should unite beyond the nation. So this worked easily for the whole 20th century. Meanwhile, developed a new reality, transnational reality, transnational financial capital, transnational cooperation, but also transnational networks through communication, through people, religion, way of life, etc., etc. This transnational reality is complex, and it shows that the multilateral institution, the UN system, have been bypassed by the new reality. The nation state has been bypassed by new realities. For example, the G20 is an organization that has no democratic mandate to regulate the global system. It's trying to do so because new transnational dimensions, not existing in international law, not existing in the international relation, have been forcing our system to change. So internationalism itself has also to adapt. In order to adapt, you have to raise one of the issues. The issue is the commons. What, for example, is the defense of water? The water we mentioned in Brazil or under the sea belongs to who? The air that we breathe belongs to who? The genes that we are composed belongs to who? So I coined this word trans-internationalism to say, yes, we are entering a new dimension in the 21st century that is beyond the state, but also is infra-state, meaning that underneath the state, as he was saying, from the bottom up, what we say global and local. Citizens have to fight to repoliticize and to create a new strategy. And what I have said is that the word global south for me doesn't capture the nature of the phenomenon, because the global south is in fact the consequence of globalization too. But that's why I'm saying that we have to rediscover the values of the three-continental. We have to understand what internationalist values are, not on a cosmopolitan, but on a transnational level. That's why I coined transnational and internationalism in one word, and it became trans-internationalism. I'm not saying that it will prevail. I'm not saying that, and this is one of the diseases we politicians have, political scientists, we coin words. And as I've said, development itself is a word with a lot of limitations. Everyone is using the word revolution. Everyone is using it, but the revolution is when you do the whole tour and then you come back. So in fact, you're coming to restoration. Everyone is using it because it is usable word. It's easy, but in terms of semantics, sometimes it's totally false. The map that we are using in geography is mainly false. Most of the books of the world today are using maps that are not true. It's the Mercator map that is absolutely to be replaced by the Peters projection, which actually is the correct view. So it takes time, you see, to accept new concepts. The non-aligned movement was a new concept. The idea was non-aligned, it was something new. It takes time, and now it faded. And I'm saying the non-aligned movement is no longer the strategy. Why? Because we are in a unipolar system, and this unipolar is the end of our system if it prevails. We need to recover a polycentric world, and in order to do that, unfortunately, we have to be resistant, we have to be resilient, and we have to recreate new strategies. And this is part of the new generation recreating new strategies. So words are just semantics, you know, and a cat is a cat. You can call it a felon, you can call it a leopard, a tiger, but it's still a cat, you know, and his sole purpose is to behave as a cat.
Yeah, very clear. Thank you very much for the explanation.
Me?
Thank you very much for asking me the question from you, gentlemen. You have asked me a question about can you solve a problem yourself? About conflict you are asking me, isn't it? Yes? Okay. What I can say is that as Nepal was a sovereign nation for several years, hundreds of years, there was peace and peace and peace only. We survived in peace throughout. I'm a man of 68 years. I never saw this kind of conflict in my nation. But the world has developed. People have demands for every modern things. So globalization has made our country a village. Now there are a lot of demands. Due to that, people have expectations and aspirations. That's why they want something which can be easily found. It's not the case. Our country was always united. But somehow, one gentle lady told, united succeed, divided will fall down. So once we were united and we were successful. Now there is a chance of division that we can do ourselves. We can unite our nation ourselves. We can solve our problems ourselves. This is my personal feeling. To respond to your question about terrorism, see, again I want to tell you, a man who survived for more than 6 decades, never saw terrorism. Only during recent times, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, these kind of things came. I'm really surprised to see Islamic State. 2 Japanese people were just taken in such places. They were slaughtered because of no reason. 200 and 300 school girls, they were captured in Nigeria. For no reasons they were killed. In Syria, see the cases. Several thousands people are displaced from their countries. Because of I don't know what has happened to the leaders. They do not want to solve the problem themselves. They should be able to solve their problem themselves so that external forces do not come to solve their problems. So that's why the terrorism has emerged in that way. So this is what I have mentioned, few terrorist groups who are really burning the world now. The world is burning. We want peace and tranquility. That's what I want to say. Thank you very much.
So for the question about the sugar cane and the diesel, yeah, we still use in Brazil sugar cane as well as diesel. Each car which comes out of the Volkswagen or whatever it is, which is produced in Brazil, has the double possibility to be used with oil or even to be used with sugarcane diesel. It's obliged by law the producers who are producing cars for the Brazilian market to do that way. It was a period that was in the 80s that it was possible to have a car only by diesel or only by sugarcane diesel. That's not the question today. They are I don't know how to say it, but both possibilities in the same car. The motors are designed in such a way that they can use either one, either the other one. And the technology is developed by Brazilian engineering too. It's very interesting, that point you mentioned. But should I perhaps have a minute to a reflection that was through Aziz came to my mind, and in relation with the maps. I am a historian and political scientist, but I use many maps in to my students. And I started explaining that maps are not neutral. Maps represent the earth, and a representation, even though we have no idea of that, they have a power point of view inside them. So I showed to them that in the Middle Ages, when this Islamic civilization was in the golden age, the cartographers used the south-oriented map. So I think that we are nowadays in a conference that should put as a suggestion to adopt our south-oriented map for our schools and universities, because in our mind, to be upside, to be in the top means to have power, and to be in the bottom means to obey or to be submitted. So if the south is on the top, that is the aim of Bandung. Shall we perhaps have our maps south-oriented?
Thank you very much. That was a good point. Actually, it's all about the angle from which you are looking at reality and the angle from which you are looking at the world. And I think that's what the whole spirit has been about. So look, seen from a particular point of view, the world is as it would not want it. We want it different. Therefore, we have the right, obviously, to look at it from where we are. And I think that's really, this should be the starting point of this whole discussion, and that's the epistemological angle from which we are looking at it. I mentioned earlier on the notion of the colonial library, the way in which the tools we are using, the sciences we are operating with, actually are influenced heavily culturally by the location from which they are produced. And I think trying to look at social realities from the point of view of the poor, of the masses, has been actually quite good for science itself. And it has led to what some people have talked about, subaltern African issues. Epistemologies of the South is the title of a whole book written by Boaventura Santos, where he captures actually a whole different way in which a number of angles, ecological point of view, feminist point of view, a number of research angles actually have contributed to making science progress by challenging some of the received wisdom that's had dominated the science for a long time. And I think in that sense, we can say, I think we've made some progress, basically. I think Bandung was not a total failure. And we have seen, even from the sort of balance sheet that was presented yesterday, that from the objectives that I said, then many of them were achieved. But even in the field of science, I think we've done quite a lot. In our own work, the council I work for, the Clarkson and a number of others, we've done quite a lot, I think, in terms of changing the terms of the debate, basically, to bring in our perspectives. And I think that really is very, very important. Modernization theory was challenged effectively from Latin America. British, Donald Frank, and then Samir Rabin and all of them. So nobody can talk about development or about evolution of the world as it used to be before this people came to the discussion. And that debate has been taken forward in a much bigger way in respect to so many issues, gender studies and so many other areas. So I think there's some progress, and we should acknowledge that we've made some progress. And the whole point is to make sure that that progress is also recognized and accepted by the in the scholarly community to begin with, which itself is actually full of hierarchies and asymmetries. The knowledge production, there's a whole, the first volume of the World Society report is actually titled Knowledge Divides. The divides that they're talking about are within the knowledge production community itself, and I think that's why it's very important to interrogate the concepts. And I think as you should be right. Secondly, the point about the diaspora, that Lazare mentioned, basically we are talking about the global south, and therefore we should talk about all these groups, that are marginalized, oppressed, that are at the receiving end of these dominant power relations that exist, whether they are geographically in the south or in the north. And I think that's very important. Thirdly, culture has been mentioned. Telenovelas, I don't know who mentioned this thing. That was a very important point. You see, I grew up watching Indian films in Gambia. Egyptian films are all over the world in North Africa and beyond. Nollywood, Nigeria is a booming industry today. The same thing could be said of music. You listen to Jamaican music in all over Africa. You listen to Congolese music elsewhere, salsa, Latin American salsa. So in the realm of culture, the exchanges have been going on, and I think that's something to be taken into account, really, very important. And I'm sure the panel on culture will be taking up those issues again. The third point is that I want to come back to the point about knowledge production. I think somebody in the early presentation about cities to cities, universities to universities, think tanks to think tanks, the knowledge production level is absolutely fundamental. We need to connect the work we are doing. Many of us here are operating in research institutions and in universities or think tanks or involved in knowledge production or dissemination somehow. We need to connect the work we are doing. We need to exchange what more that we are doing. We need to share insights from different parts of the world to enrich these programs and the discussions, public and policy that we are having at various levels. Fourth or fifth point is that the South, as has been rightly said, is also a theater of struggle. It's where many of the wars have been fought now. It's where the contestations are taking place. It's where the violence is actually being unfolding and spreading in a number of ways. And I think that we need to acknowledge. It is also where the injustices are going on in a big way at every level. It's where you have the forms of extremism, being expressed in all kinds of ways. If you take what we are just talking about, alternative sources of energy, biofuels in Brazil, the multinational companies engage in producing biofuels in Brazil. They don't stop in Brazil, they are operating in Africa. They engage in the land grabbing movement in Africa to produce biofuels in Ghana and elsewhere. Similarly, we have Indian multinationals operating in Africa, operating across the world. Chinese multinationals are operating all over the world. South African multinationals are operating within the continent and elsewhere. And as multinationals, they misbehave wherever they are. So you need regulatory systems, proper functioning state systems that can put that into account and under control. It doesn't mean that it nullifies the discussion about solidarity. It just means you have to acknowledge the fact that within the South, there are power relations, there are class struggles going on, there are national struggles also going on, which I think we have to take into account as we discuss. Fourth point, or the last point I want to make, I don't want to delay the coffee because I know this is a session after lunch, people are waiting for the coffee. It's from the beginning. But funding is a very vital point here. Somebody was saying in the previous session that there are not many Africans here. Of course, they cannot be here for many of them. There's a problem of information sharing, but part of it is if people have to pay their way to come to meetings that are distant in places as this and that, this thing, you will not have many of them be able to come because the conditions in which you're operating are different. When the African Studies Association of the United States organizes its annual things, they just announce it and people come in all kinds of ways from anywhere. They come by bus, they come by train, they come by air. Because our universities are supporting them, they have salaries that can enable them to do that. They have research budgets and travel budgets. Right? So you have a lot of people coming. When we organize the Presidential General Assembly, if you don't have enough money to pay for 200, 300 people, we'll have nobody. because a lot of people cannot afford to pay the ticket and travel to Indonesia to come for a conference like this one. So we need to take that into account, and say, look, as we organize, I think the next editions of a conference like this one, we should raise money for a scholarship fund to at least pay for a certain number of people who will be able to come from countries and communities where they need support. That's just one point. I think it's a small point actually. The fundamental point is, if you're talking about knowledge production, if you're talking about exchanges within the South, we need to have resources to sustain those exchanges. The South has to be dependent on itself for its own development and for its own change and transformation. And this is a discussion that is going on. In Africa now, we have for a long time, the leading African regional organization, the African Union, is dependent on foreign funding for a good part of its budget. And that's a joke. You can't say you're transforming a whole continent, you are integrating the continent, you are looking for change, and yet every little project you design, you want to look for funding from other parts elsewhere to get it to happen, right? And now it is just characteristic that they themselves are now beginning to change what they're saying. The African Union is saying now that this new thing that they have wanted, Agenda 2063, will be funded largely by resources from within the continent itself. Because they commissioned a study last year, and the study came out, a report made by former President of Harrak, $63 billion of illicit flows from the continent every year. $63 billion lost in all kinds of traffic from the continent. And that's just the financial flows. We're not even talking about the stealing of minerals, the stealing of people, the stealing of timber, the stealing of all kinds of materials from the continent. So if you have functioning governance systems, you actually have a way of maybe generating a lot of resources to sustain and finance the projects that we are talking about. And I think it is a comprehensive approach that we have to all these things, and it's a transformative approach. I'd like to thank Thomas Sreger, the director of this museum, for hosting us. And he's been talking about actually encouraging us to visit the museum around here. It's a historic place. It's a privilege being here. And we really would like to thank him and thank the Indonesian government. Thank you to Darwis. I'm not sure whether I'll have a chance to say this again, but I really appreciate it. And thank all the people who have helped in making this conference a good conference. I see somebody, you really have to say something? Okay.
Because it's related to my question, and it's related to what she said. I want to ask you, can you add South-oriented, trans, and internationally?
Fine, that's fine. That will be for the report. Thank you to the panelists. I think we need a round of applause to the panelists. I'm sorry for speaking for so long. I wasn't supposed to. But the discussion continues in the next session.